Hello, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining How the Latest Technology in 3D Printing is Changing the Healthcare Industry. My name is Jessica Coughlin, and I'm the Healthcare Market Development Leader at Stratasys, which is a global leader in 3D printing and additive solutions, materials, and services. I'm very excited to be joined today with a fantastic panel of 3D experts and advocates. Today, we have with us Dr. Bob Hannon, a cardiothoracic surgeon at Nicklaus Children's Hospital, Seth Friedman, manager of the Innovation, Imaging, and Simulation Modeling Center at Seattle Children's Hospital, Chuck Romans, 3D Design Prototype Director of Proto Studios, working directly with the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics, and Jake Brennan, Senior Engineer at BD Technologies and Innovation. So our panel of experts will be sharing with us how they're leveraging Stratasys digital anatomy technology to help drive innovation, improve medical interventions, and improve clinical and economic outcomes. So before we dive in and hear directly from our panel of experts, I'm going to be providing a brief overview of the Stratasys digital anatomy technology. So each of our panel members has already adopted this technology and is using it today for product development, education and training, and pre-surgical planning. So the digital anatomy technology, it can create anatomical models that replicate close to the same biomechanical properties as human tissue and bone. So it provides the most realistic anatomical models for testing and training. Now, this technology is reducing the need for animals and cadavers by providing an alternative solution that can target that exact pathology you're looking to replicate. So how is this possible? A couple things combine to make this possible. So the first thing is innovative materials. Tissue matrix, which is the first material that you can see on the left-hand side, it's the softest material in 3D printing industry. It allows you to create complete cardiac models with functional tricuspid, pulmonary, mitral, and aortic valves. It's a soft material that allows you to create even other soft organs like kidneys and liver, and even hollow organs like stomach. It can, with the software and the material combined, it can mimic healthy and disease states. And the secret to all this is it provides that similar haptic response as the real thing when performing surgical procedures such as cutting and suturing and inserting and deploying medical devices. The next material is called gel matrix. Now, this is actually a support material. It's a sophisticated support material, and it has sort of like a pudding, I guess, or gel-like consistency. So it enables you to create very small, complex vasculature down to 1 millimeter in internal diameter and easily remove the support material. So some of you on this call today may have 3D printed vasculature before and have come across the difficulties that are often associated with removing that support material. Gel matrix makes it a whole lot easier. Also, when creating vasculature, there's Agilis material blends that can create arteries that have similar biomechanical response as human vessels. So they expand and contract as internal pressure is applied. And then last but not least, the bone matrix. It's a strong but flexible material that has memory to help maintain its shape. So it allows you to create these bone models with variations in cancellous and cortical density, and it provides that similar haptic response as human and cadaver bone when you're performing medical procedures with surgical instruments and devices such as sawing, reaming, inserting screws, and attaching plates. Now, these materials combine with the GrabCAD Print digital anatomy software. So this is really what makes it all possible. So there's a combination of materials and more than 100 clinically validated preset options. So these anatomies are configured using these unique material combinations that vary in things like softness, flexibility, and density to help achieve that native tissue and bone behavior. So you simply choose the anatomy and the anatomical elements. So in the example on the right, you can see that they've selected myocardium. And then you choose the properties for the anatomical element. And there's a variety of choices depending on what pathology you're looking to create. So in this example, they have myocardium. So you can select from a range from highly contractile to extremely stiff. So that's the overview on the digital anatomy technology. Now we're going to get to the good stuff and hear directly from our panel of experts on how they're using this technology in their institutions. I'll also be sharing images from our panel that they wanted to share with you all today. So the first question that I have for the panel is, how has advancements in 3D printing technology provided you with options you've never had before? So I'm actually going to start with you, Dr. Hannon, and I'm going to share a couple images that you shared with me.
When we first got our Eden 260 and J750, we were very excited about the ability to actually operate on heart models. This has been a huge, very fruitful learning experience for us in the past 5 years. We were able to do some very extraordinary things with the previous generation of materials. For instance, we were able to size intracardiac devices accurately and turn a potential 5th reoperative median sternotomy into a 45-minute case in the cath lab that used 1 device instead of 5 devices at $8,000 a piece. But with the arrival of the bioprinter, we're actually able to operate on the models, and that's been extraordinarily fruitful. As surgeons, we're tactile. Sterionosis means something real to us. It's fascinating to me that my partner, Dr. Burke, the chief of the cardiac surgery division, and I were both fanatical model makers when we were kids. And now we build models inside of babies' hearts, essentially, out of living tissue. And the ability to operate on living tissue, living realistic, adds a tremendous amount to our preoperative planning. In addition, we use the models for patient teaching and education and giving a child a model of their heart that they can keep. In the good old days, they had a scar on their chest. They didn't know what their heart disease was or what their problem was. When they get a model of their heart, they're very excited about it. And the more realistic it is, the more compelling it is. So the ability to print lifelike materials has really opened up new worlds for us that we're very much still exploring. And again, it's been a voyage of discovery for us, starting with the Eden 260 through the J750, and now through the advancements of the latest iteration. And we're very excited about where we're going to go and the ability that we're going to have to pre-plan operations inside the heart, create jigs and fixtures and machine shop terms that'll help us do operations more accurately and more safely.
Great. Jake, how have these advancements provided you with options you've never had before?
Sure. So we've had the digital anatomy upgrade at Becton Dickinson for just about a year now. And since installing it, there's been a lot of excitement about the materials among the BD engineering teams that we support. And we're still only just scratching the surface of what we can achieve with these new materials. The tissue matrix material and its various configurations have been especially useful at BD. We've printed everything from skin and tissue simulations to vasculature and even non-anatomical prototypes because of the unique material properties. The options for a high-resolution, ultra-soft material were really severely lacking in the additive manufacturing world. So tissue matrix fills a need that has blown many of our engineers away. The nasal anatomies that you can see on the slide here, might have to go forward 1 slide. But yes, so on the top left, those nasal anatomies, a really good example of what we can do with tissue matrix. And our project team at BD is really happy with them compared to the predecessor, Agilis, which is a little bit harder. So likewise, the gel matrix material has opened new possibilities for us. With the gel support configuration, we're able to print and clean out narrow vessels that we wouldn't have attempted in the past. So beyond opening possibilities, it's also saved us time. And like tissue matrix, we've been using it for applications even outside of anatomical printing. So on the bottom left here, the vasculature model, it's a great example of what we can achieve with gel matrix. It may be hard to see in the picture, but this model is a network of vessels that include some really narrow internal diameters, many under 2 millimeters wide. And this would have taken weeks to clean out in the past, even with the semi-soluble 706 support. But with gel matrix, we can clean it out in a day. And then most recently, we've been experimenting with the different vascular calcification configurations for a product demo. You can see example of that in the bottom right corner. So just to sum up, the digital anatomy upgrade provides us with not only new materials, but also numerous anatomical configurations. And we've had a lot of success stories, even though we're still just scratching the surface of what we can fully accomplish.
Great. And how about from your side, Seth?
I think that, we have, we've had our digital anatomy printer, I guess, for a little over a month, and we have printed an enormous amount of pediatric specific models in that time. And really, we had, I think, similar to the other presenters, we had done a lot of work across all the different tissue types over the past 5 or 6 years. And Agilis was sort of our best case material. And we did a lot of work in airway, and the airway team was sort of, I think, really has been one of the main groups that has moved forward with this planning of surgical models and practicing on the models and comparing it to post-operative results and outcomes. And then we had sort of this scenario where we really could not exploit soft enough materials. And there was a child with a very difficult tracheostomy tube that you can see on the top right. And despite sort of in a digital sense, trying every possible tube that might fit into this digital model, we really needed something that we could try out in the real world. And so the tissue matrix, before we even had the printer, we got some of the very early test prints from the prototyping facility in Israel. And it was incredibly helpful to just be able to try out this permutation of trach tubes before we had a printer here in-house. So I think for us, it's really an amazing opportunity to try and align the material settings with the pediatric tissues, which, although there's definite overlap there, there's a lot of difference in things like tracheal cartilage across the lifespan and in really young patients. So I think that's what we're super excited about, is we kind of have this very myopic pediatric lens, but there's a lot of possibilities on how to optimize care with normal specific pediatric tissues, and then also disease specific.
Really great. And finally, Chuck.
Yeah, we can relate very much with exactly what the other speakers were saying. We originally started printing anatomical models on the original J750, the multi-material color printer, about 4.5 years ago. First using the original soft material option, Tingle Plus. Then about 2 years ago, we switched to an improved Agilis material and the 706B soft support material option. These two materials were a huge improvement in soft tissue anatomy and post-processing reduction, but still needed more realism. So the requests from the surgeons were to have anatomical models with a more realistic feel and responsive behavior, better simulating real organ tissue, both for surgical planning and tool creation. And on the digital anatomy printer, the multi-material pre-selection options in the GrabCAD print software provided us with much better results. In addition, there were fewer reprints, and there was also overall time savings in the process. There are also options to print variable disease stages, which was a really nice option to have. The models we needed to provide were to simulate organic tissue, better results for suturing and cutting, the ability to insert valves and patches, and color an option for subpart identity. The slide here shows samples of what is possible. We presented these prints to a couple of the surgeons, and they provided very positive feedback. It is also getting them to start thinking about other possibilities.
Great. Okay, so I have another question for our lovely panel. Improving clinical outcomes, it is a top priority for all healthcare fields. I think this is well known. So how has the latest 3D printing technology helped you address this challenge? And I will start with you, Jake.
Sure. So this technology has opened doors that enable us to provide quick and realistic solutions for experimentation with new product concepts. Our project teams have used the printed anatomical components for usability studies, just for one example, that can be conducted without the need for human subjects, which is huge, of course. And by combining CT scanning and 3D printing, we can produce lifelike simulations of anatomical features throughout the body and perform product demonstrations on these anatomies to physicians. So just a lot of benefits that we didn't have before.
Great. And how about you, Chuck?
Yeah, I was informed that it has helped reduce operating time and improve patient recovery. These models were used for complicated patient-specific surgical cases. We would segment and print the area of interest and create the desired templates for the surgeon to identify the correct surgical approach and practice pre-surgery. These are CAD examples of a couple of the cases that surgeons practiced before surgery. The heart defect had blood flow into the wrong chamber. A patch had to be placed to redirect the flow. A template of the patch was printed to cut the accurate shape and scale for actual tissue to be placed in the heart during surgery. The trachea had a collapse defect and needed to be enlarged. Same as the heart patient, the patch template was created to identify the accurate size of the enlargement and required to be performed. Next slide. This slide shows two patient-specific heart defect cases that was printed in the software, and we were able to select the desired material matrix, both printed in the structural heart family and the myocardium as the element material, and highly contractile for the stiffness. We received very positive feedback from this material selection. All cases provided positive outcomes in surgical preparedness with a reduction in surgical time and patient stay. In addition, we were hoping to provide 3D printed models as an alternative to cadaver used for medical training and device development.
Great. So Seth, how at Seattle Children's has this helped improve clinical outcomes?
Well, I think, there's some very specific case examples in the short time that we've had the printer. I think that the ability to actually create constructs where you have multiple materials that mimic things like bone and cartilage in the same print has really been helpful for things like, if you really need to make sure that you want to pre-bend plates properly for an orthopedic case, or you need to select very specific hardware, there's something that you really gain by having both realistic materials that you can cut and sort of put back together in the way that the surgeon desires. And then also this ability to model the entirety of the surgery. And so on the left here, you can see one of the early prints that we made where you have the full range of esophagus, airway, spine, that really is going to allow the surgeons to see the range of manipulation that they'll need in terms of the esophagus and how they might stitch the airway after the procedure. I also think that, in an outcome sense, what has really been, I think, to echo what Chuck and Jake have discussed in terms of device development. I mean, slide tracheoplasty, as seen in the upper right here, is something that is a very rare procedure. And it's something right now that you don't have a lot of practice if you're a resident or a fellow or even a young attending. And so the ability to make multi-part constructs that mimic wall and muscle and the cartilage tissue and then practice the tracheal sleeve procedure allows you both this level of confidence in a specific patient model it also allows this new opportunity for us to really evaluate how making different either distances where the cuts or the orientation of the cuts to see how those affect things like luminal caliber and length, which are really, really important to the ultimate patient outcome. And then at Seattle Children's, there's a large research program that sort of we're aligning with some mice that have different tracheal sleeve abnormalities. So where we can start to count the normal rings and the abnormal rings, and we can start to sort of align these two things where we're taking our research animal data and our human data, and we're going to more and more be able to put those together in these prints that we're able to use for specific patient cases. So I think, the outcome ranges from better, surgical planning type things to in the OR to, I think, as Robert mentioned, there is this X factor of being able to give a patient something that is their airway that they're going to, to both for understanding and just that exchange is really, really valuable.
Great. Yeah, it sounds like you're doing some really great things. And last but not least, Dr. Hannon, how do you believe this is improving clinical outcomes at Nicholas Children's?
I would say this is easy because all the above, my colleagues on the call have expressed it, extremely well. And I would add to what Seth just said. When we deal with patients who've been deemed as inoperable by multiple other institutions because of terrible God-given anatomy, and we print out an entire chest of a baby who only has one ventricle, half a heart, and one lung, half of his lung, and are able to actually visualize that the entire chest of a baby, visualize the operation we're going to do, and perform parts of it with realistic tissue material. It gives you an intangible confidence going forward. And with the reputation of using 3D models for that, the patients come out of the woodwork. And so the intangible factors, in addition to all the teaching, patient education, surgical planning, I think that, if that the intangible confidence you have going into the operating room to do previously declared inoperable cases, you can hold it in your hand, you can cut it, you can see it, you can see where A needs to go to A prime, B needs to go to B prime, and that confidence translates into better outcomes.
Excellent. So what are we seeing here on the screen with these images?
This is a model that we made for one of our plastic surgeons, who's a hand specialist surgeon. And this is a little 4-year-old boy who ended up inside his entire body, inside a running washing machine, retrieving his Power Ranger. And as you can see, virtually every bone in his arm is broken. And we were able to print this very expeditiously for surgical planning, and also for medical legal reasons. It's a very, very compelling model, in large part because it feels so lifelike. And it's also a really cool model that we enjoy making for our plastic surgeon colleagues.
Great. All right. So the final question I have for the panel is, for any healthcare company looking to adopt new technology, we know that there is always a need to justify the cost. So what, in your opinion, with your institutions, has been the return on investment? And I'll start with you, Jake.
Sure. So I can say right after installing the digital anatomy upgrade, we printed a benchtop testing model made from a tissue matrix configuration that saved over 10 $20,000 compared to fabricating the model using a traditional method. But beyond the outstanding cost savings, like Dr. Hannon just talked about, there's definitely some intangibles involved in having these materials. Really, just having the ability to print the unique materials gives our engineering teams advantages that they didn't have before. Because now we can print 3D anatomical simulations that are more complex than what's possible with traditional fabrication methods. And we can print and ship them on the same day that we receive the CAD in many cases. Our primary focus in the advanced prototyping group at BD is to provide fast and quality solutions that support our numerous project groups across the globe. So when the Digital Anatomy Upgrade was released at a really reasonable price point, and especially with us being in a medical device industry, it was really a no-brainer for us. Stratasys has been really receptive to our feedback on the new anatomical configurations, and they've worked with us to push the boundaries of what we can accomplish with the material properties. So yeah, we look forward to continuing to grow our close relationship with Stratasys and staying on the cutting edge of these new material offerings.
Great. Yeah, we're definitely happy to have you as a customer. And Seth, so what's been the return on investment at Seattle Children's?
I mean, I think that there's really two categories. I mean, I think, as Jake said, I mean, I think that this ability to create new materials has, it is that X factor that we were, very much waiting to get a printer in-house that could do that. I think we were pretty happy outsourcing for a long time just because someone else had to clean the prints and someone else had to ship the parts and those sorts of realities. I think there's maybe 2 or 3 maybe big buckets. Certainly there's, I think, a lot of very good published literature now that being able to pre-bend plates and cut models up and select the appropriate tooling has real monetary benefit of time saved. And I think that is as we go forward, that is one of the main metrics that we'll measure and be able to sort of justify to our hospital leadership that we are, being good stewards of this resource and that this is actually much cheaper than outsourcing, which is, I think, a common one. I think from I'm much more in the individual patient, I would say, perspective than thinking so much about this big nomothetic, like what's the calculus of printing and is it worth it for your hospital? On an individual sort of group patient basis, just to echo that this ability to make constructs that people can practice on is going to be a huge return because the ability to print 10 little small tracheal sleeve models and have a group of oto surgeons and residents and fellows practice on them and then learn how the best procedure will be going forward to provide the best airway caliber in a specific patient or group of patients is really going to be game changing for how we can deliver care. And so I think that to me is the biggest return is going to be in this sort of procedural impact. Like you can probably save a lot of time. There probably is a real significant value to, as Robert said, having your surgeon really think this is going to work. I believe that I know how the different paths that I can proceed. And I really see as a science person from the outside that this is it's not going to create a surgeon is not going to say, oh, I now have my idea for what I'm going to do, but it does lead them down a path. They have 4 different roads, and this is one of those things that really seems like it's helpful in both that individual's decision process and then in the communication between the much broader care team. So I think that's what we're really as a hospital looking to measure is sort of the simplest way to say this saved OR time to how it changes process and then how we can really use it to create better outcome paths, to say this is the tracheal sleeve length that you need for this patient and show that in a scientific way. So I think it's a work in progress, but I feel very much the game changer has been soft materials for us.
Right. And would you say that the time in the operating room when they do have the opportunity to practice on these models has reduced?
I think that's the big question. I think there are definitely studies out there to suggest that it can, in certain specialties and certain conditions, it is reduced. It's always that if we were to pass this to the only one of us that actually does, I'm a bloodless surgeon, so we got, Robert on the line who can give us the sense. I mean, I think the hardest part is just finding the control subjects that don't have these procedures. In some ways it becomes an estimation, whereas pre-bending plates is a really clear sense that you've saved time. But my sense is, if you take if you think something is going to be helpful, you should probably do it in all cases. And that sounds like that's Robert's model at his facility, which is when you lower the barrier to having to get reimbursed for these from insurance, you can actually probably measure what the true impact is. So I think that's certainly our goal here as well.
Excellent. Okay, so Dr. Hannon, then how do you believe that this has provided some sort of return on investment at Nicholas Children's?
Again, it's easy to agree with everything that's been said so far. There's no substitute for a trainee to do 10 mock operations for a slide tracheoplasty. There's no substitute. And excuse me, the intangibles, we thought about outsourcing our models while we were in the process of buying a printer. What we learned right away with our Eden 260 is we didn't like a model, we just printed another one. We didn't worry about it. And we print another one to give to the child, another one to give to the president of the board of trustees, who does not go to a fundraising meeting without models to give away. He calls up and says, I need 5 models to give away at our most recent fundraiser. Barbara Nicholas, Jack Nicklaus's wife and the force behind Nicholas Children's, has 2 models on her bedside stand that I made for inspiration. How do you measure the return on investment of that? How do you measure the return on investment of a 16-year-old girl who doesn't get her fifth operation, but instead has a 45-minute procedure in the cath lab? The intangibles are innumerable. One of the biggest returns on investment is when we present patients in the cardiac cath conference, they're being presented on an 8-foot wide monitor, and the cardiologists say, well, why don't you just sew this to that? And when we say, well, that's sewing 1 millimeter to 1.5 millimeters, they say, well, you're just chickening out. When we show them the model and they say, oh, yeah, you're right, you can't sew that to this. You'd be nuts to try that. So let's let the kid grow up. So, the same people who turned us down 3 times in the capital budget committee, and I had to commit a series of minor misdemeanors to use our research money to buy the 3D printer, were extraordinarily happy about the millions of dollars of advertising marketing value they got. About 12 million people have seen the news stories about our 3D printing program as of a couple of years ago. So the intangibles add up to what Michael Porter from Harvard Business School calls a differentiator. And it differentiates your program. It results in better trained surgeons. It results in better outcomes. I think in this year, it's becoming a mandatory part of a surgical program.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to touch on one quick thing before I move on to Chuck. So you mentioned providing the model to the patient and the family. Can you walk us through what that's like to actually hand over a young child's anatomy and put it in their hands and explain that? What does that feel like?
It's an incredible experience. It's incredibly rewarding because they get it. They understand, and they're holding their own heart life-sized in their hand. And when you're talking to a child preoperatively, and they understand the operation they're going to get, and then they can go home with the model. And then it shows up on social media that, hey, Nicholas Children's gave us a model of the heart. And as those who participate in congenital heart care know, social media is the dominating force in marketing in congenital heart surgery right now. And it's intensely rewarding. It's intensely rewarding saving a child an operation based on the 3D model. It creates a chain of education and engagement with the family that's irreplaceable. There's no substitute for it. And as I said, our president of the board of trustees of the system doesn't go to a fundraiser without a couple of heart models in his pocket.
Very good. So very powerful stuff. And finally, Chuck, from your perspective, what's been the return on investment?
Well, with being a prototyping hub, our business case for establishing the Medical Printing Bureau was to set a metrics to report on requested by the IEDA, which is the Iowa Economic Development Authority, for a validation to fund the printer and support to increase medical device development and improve overall medical outcomes within the state of Iowa. So a few samples of the metrics would be support of new medical device startups, startup companies, reduction in surgical time, reduction in expenses, improved patient outcomes, impact on surgical outcomes, and then number of claims submitted utilizing new CPT codes, and then also student engagement and training and professional and student talent retention. So the digital anatomy printer was funded by the IEDA. Pro Studios is an independent entity from UIHC, but the printing bureau was placed in UIHC right where the surgeons are to expedite growth and medical advancements. Overall, a net positive.
Excellent. All right. Well, that is all the questions I have for our panel members. Now I'm going to open it up to the audience to see if anyone has any questions.